Hello again there, YouTubers. I'm Christopher Snowdon. You're tuning in to another episode of the Swift Half with Snowdon, half-hour chat show. That's really all it is. Usually with somebody I know and like, and this week is no exception. It's my good pal, the economics editor of the Spectator, Kate Andrews. Kate, how's it going?
Hi, Chris. Also, pal. Great to see you.
Are you looking forward to the Big Bang on July the 19th, or are you terrified and are
Well,
going to be performatively wearing a mask forever?
No, I'm looking forward to it. Am I at all convinced that it's Freedom Day and we're back to normal? No, not at all. But I won't be performatively doing anything. I find the mask debate really quite ridiculous because everyone's gone. Everyone, right? If we were in agreement about anything during the pandemic, it's that the British public overall has done a great job, been very selfless, stayed home, all the rest of it, things that are true. But now all of a sudden it's like all these people who were selfless for a year and a half are apparently going to go intentionally cough on elderly, vulnerable people. It's like the sense of duty and selflessness for a lot of people, they just think it's going to go out the window if the public isn't forced to do it. So I'm not going to do anything performative, but isn't everybody still probably going to have a mask in their bag? And, if they're in a situation where they think it's thoughtful to put it on, surely they will. I'm not even sure why it's a discussion.
Yeah, I don't know really. It seems to me that the people who are really upset about this, and there's loads more than I expected. I thought the kind of nation had come together now, and there was some kind of consensus that this, we give it another 4 weeks, fair enough. But now, let's be serious about this. But I think these people really overestimate the power of the few remaining restrictions. Seems to me the Big Bang was May the 17th, really. That's when you could go inside a pub and you could do a hell of a lot of things. And yeah, it wasn't total freedom by any means, but it was enough to get the virus circulating again. And it's certainly done that. The infection rate's gone up tenfold since the May relaxation. Why do they think masks are so effective? I mean, I'm not against masks as such. I think they probably do work on the margins, but of all the things we've done, they're probably the least effective part of the equation compared to test and trace or the rule of six or anything like that. They don't seem very useful, and yet it seems to be the one thing that these kind of remainers are most tied to. I guess partly because it is a visual thing, it is a performative thing.
Well, in America, wearing a mask became a symbol in a way that it really didn't here. But I think that's because we were always slightly more scientific based. We were never required to wear them outside, for example. Whereas in the States, if you walked around outside, even with space between you and other people in the street, and you weren't wearing a mask in some parts of the country, people thought you were a bad person. Or they thought you voted for Donald Trump, frankly. It really became like a Democrat versus Republican thing. And I was really grateful that we avoided that. It seems that we haven't, but now I think it really is this sort of, it's moving into a culture war, which is ridiculous, but the standoff between those who think that we need to keep society restricted in some way for a long time and those who don't. But I don't like that it's about masks, because for me, I'll tell a small little story. When I was in Sweden last October for 5 days, which was incredible because it was just like being thrown back into real life for 5 days. They don't wear masks there. Anders Tegnell, their top epidemiologist, has never forced that. He didn't think that they were all that effective. So people don't wear masks in Sweden. But if you saw someone with a mask, the attitude wasn't, oh, you're ridiculous, why are you wearing that mask? It was, wow, that person probably thinks they are very vulnerable. And so people's behavior shifted. They would get out of their way. They would really socially distance, give them space. Everyone almost protected them because they're wearing the mask. It strikes me that there's a really positive way that we can move to a voluntary system and still be kind and nice to each other and thoughtful about what we're doing. But we're turning it into this awful thing of signaling. And I don't think that's actually going to help anybody vulnerable.
Yeah, I was talking about this, I think on the last episode, about the kind of the cultural war about masks in America, and was saying, thank God it hasn't happened over here, but it really does look like, maybe it won't. Maybe when July 19th comes around, I think these people are going to be surprised how few people are actually voluntarily wearing masks. It'll be basically the same people who are wearing masks outside now, I think, which is a very small fraction of the population.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think numbers will go down probably quite significantly. And this is something we've never been able to gauge, is that polling throughout the pandemic has always said that people want more restrictions. This will be one of the first times that we actually get to see revealed preference over stated preference, because lots of people are still polling saying they want masks to stay. They can stay. People can voluntarily wear them. It's up to them. So we'll see whether or not they actually do it.
Yeah, and it seems from the polling I've seen that the British public are in favour basically of ending, maybe not masks, but pretty much everything else on July the 19th. I saw Neil Ferguson yesterday. He was saying that, he thinks basically it's fairly sensible to open up. It's a slight gamble, but he's pretty optimistic about it. Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance both seem to me to be on board, as far as I can tell. So, the government is, as it often has done, it genuinely is following the science, following the scientific advice. And that must be infuriating for these people who, think we should, I don't know, lock down until next spring.
Well, you've been really good on this, Chris. This idea that, either you accept that vaccines work or you don't. And this comes with all kinds of caveats and hypotheticals, like nobody wants to take the situation for granted. There could be one day a hypothetical variant that undermines all the vaccines and we are back to square one. I'm not going to jinx it and rule it out. But if we're looking at the current data, vaccines work better than anybody ever really expected them to. It is the safest we're ever going to be now. So the question is, do you want to return to your normal life? And I think a lot of people do. Now, if you don't, that's fine too. A lot of people's behavior will have shifted and, people might still be a bit nervous to go back into big crowded public spaces and they don't have to. But I think for a lot of us, we've been desperate to get back to normal life. And if you're following the science and you believe in vaccines, which I think you and I certainly do, then you're ready to get back out there. I'm not convinced they needed to delay Freedom Week by 4 days. I get that they wanted more data, it's all looking positive, but I think we could have opened up on the 21st of June, and I think the public probably would have been ready to do it.
Yeah, quite possibly, but they're certainly ready now. That's the main thing, and we finally got public opinion on our side here. I think there's a certain amount of deprogramming needs to go on, because as long as you keep putting these figures out in the news, even if it's only like 15 deaths, it's still people can visualize 15 deaths. They can't visualize the 1,500 people who died that day or whatever it is. Or is it per week? I can't remember how many people died. It's a lot of people. And so as long as we keep seeing these statistics, and we're so used to seeing these case numbers being like the forebearer of disaster. I don't know if it's that people don't want to go back to their normal lives, or they've just got no kind of real understanding of risk. And the government's done so much to terrify people, often with good reason, about COVID, because a lot of people haven't taken it seriously. Then now I think there needs to be a concerted campaign to say, look, people will die of this. It's not going to be that many people in the grand scheme of things. Masks, they kind of make a bit of a difference on the margin, but we've got rid of all the other stuff anyway. So it's really in for a penny, in for a pound. And shake people up, because I heard John Ashworth, the Labour shadow health secretary, saying yesterday that no amount of avoidable death is acceptable, which means no smoking, no drinking, no eating peanuts, no doing anything. Now, he can't really mean that. I think the guy in New York said something similar last year, that human life is totally priceless and we must do everything we can to protect it. I mean, this is obviously not a realistic way of looking at life or policy, but when people are so focused on one specific cause of death for 18 months, what do? We've got to kind of give people the other side of the story now, do you think?
Oh, we definitely do. And the appointment of Sajid Javid as the new health secretary, I think, is clearly moving in that direction. I think he's been excellent in the few days that he's held the job. And you're right, they don't actually mean that when they say it, but it sounds good. I suppose in a roundabout way, this is evidence that we are kind of moving back to normal. When you can start playing politics again, especially with something like a pandemic, then actually the data is probably not so terrifying anymore. And that's what they're doing. The Labour Party is going to want to be able to point to even more failures from the Conservative government on the pandemic, which is why I think you see that kind of language. Because as you say, he can't possibly mean that. Otherwise, you would just keep people locked up in their apartments forever. So I think the return of playing politics is maybe almost a good sign in terms of the fact that we have this under control. But I think in terms of getting people to get back to normal, assess their own risks, not take all their place from the government needs to stop feeding into some of these ridiculous questions. So it seems very popular at the moment to ask every government minister specific circumstance or this other really specific circumstance. And it's like we're back to the Scotch egg debate about the government telling us what a substantial meal was. I don't need to know where every cabinet minister might wear their mask in this specific moment. They need to stop answering those questions. They need to say people are sensible. People will figure this out. People need to do what they feel comfortable with, but we are no longer mandating that they do it. So it's not just about like becoming a bit more positive about language. It's about not catering to the state making every single decision for you. Is if we need to write down every circumstance where one might wear a mask and then put a green tick or a red X next to it. It's not how life works. So yeah, I think it's about rhetoric, but it's also about maybe rolling back what the state is instructing us to do, because for like 16 months now, we had red tape around park benches about where you could or could not sit outside, where we know this virus doesn't really, it's really difficult to transmit. It's crazy to think about. I don't know how we're going to think about this in 5 years, Chris, when the government told us whether or not we could sit on a park bench.
It's going to seem pretty surreal, I hope, anyway.
Crazy.
Now, let me ask you a couple of things about economics. I want to talk to you about pensions first. So there's a story this week that pensions could be rising by 8%. I don't think this is nailed on, but that seems to be roughly the estimate of what's going to happen. So not only have we had to lock down for pensioners for the last 18 months, we now have to give them a massively above inflation increase in their incomes. And this is at a time when the economy is still down about 9% or something. It's anyway, way down, deepest recession 300 years and so on, unemployment, what have you. Explain how this can possibly happen, Kate.
So the triple lock on pensions was controversial before the pandemic hit, but the prime minister decided he wanted to protect it because essentially rolling back any kind of spending would have been labeled austerity. And he told the Spectator a few years back that he regretted austerity as it was done by David Cameron and he didn't want to be associated with it. So the triple lock stays. But the triple lock is not designed for a pandemic or statistical anomalies. And what it does is it ties that rise to average earnings, inflation, or 2.5%, whichever is higher. Now, we've seen average wages so far go up quite significantly. I think the last count was up 5%, 5.6%, and it could go higher. Some people may well have seen their wages go up. A lot of people haven't. One of the reasons that this average has gone up is because we're talking about an average, right? And a lot of people at the lower end of the pay scale have lost their jobs completely. We've seen unemployment go up. A lot of young people in the services sectors have lost their jobs. So average wages have gone up. And now we're possibly looking at a scenario where, because a lot of young people don't have an income, pensions are set to get really quite a big boost. You can see how deeply unfair that is. And also, it highlights the problems with the triple lock in the first place. That's clearly not its intention. That's not what it was designed to do. And it could cost the Treasury £2-4 billion more than they were expecting to pay out through the state pension. And that's when we talk about the Treasury, we might as well talk about the taxpayer, because that's actually who's funding that bill. So you have 16 months, and I don't like the intergenerational war when it comes to COVID, because it's not so simple as to say young people have had the toughest time. The virus has primarily been killing the elderly. So let's not overlook that. Everyone's had a horrible time. And from the health perspective, it's certainly been the worst for the older age groups. As we talk about coming out of the pandemic and recovering, it is those younger generations who have taken one of the biggest hits from the economic perspective. And the idea that the pension would be going up as young people can't even get another job or can't get a job for some time, it doesn't sit well. It doesn't feel right. There's very little indication, though, that the government's going to change the triple lock. It was thought last autumn that a lot of cabinet ministers were on board with doing so, but that the prime minister ultimately said no. And if they're not willing to change the triple lock now, when it's so obviously been shown not to work in this situation, when are they going to do it? Just another example, really, about how this conservative government in particular talks a good talk when it comes to the market economy, but very often wants to boost state aid and spend more money and actually involve the state in areas where perhaps it shouldn't always be. And this was before the pandemic, by the way. We were talking about bailing out Flybe and not scrapping the triple lock long before the pandemic struck.
I still don't quite, I was thinking about it now, I still don't quite get how we got 8% wage growth. I mean, I take your point about a lot of low paid people lost their jobs, but unemployment hasn't gone up that much. It's gone up from about 4% to about 5%, right? And a lot of people on furlough will be on 80% of their normal wages. Not all of them, a lot will be topped up by their employer, but it just seems odd and scarcely believable that wages have actually increased by that much.
So keep in mind that the people who will have been losing their jobs are going to be the people predominantly at the
Sure,
lower.
yeah, definitely.
Then on top of that, we're still talking about a prediction. We don't know to what extent we don't know what the final number is going to be. But we do think unemployment is going to go up further this year because as people come off the furlough scheme, we're going to discover that a lot of jobs don't exist. Now, if they manage to keep this around 6.5% unemployment, I think the furlough scheme will really be chalked up as a success. Of course, there's a personal story behind every statistic, and it's certainly not to make light of it. But last year, we were talking about 12% unemployment forecast. And now we're talking about somewhere around 6%, maybe even slightly lower. So we're going to have some conflicting data coming in, though, where we see both economic recovery and unemployment going up for a while. So, it's going to get worse in the labor market before it gets better. And depending on what the average is when the state pension is decided for the following year, will depend on what kind of hike they get.
Yeah, I mean, I'll hold my hands up. I was a big doom monger when it came to unemployment last year. I thought we would see record unemployment.
You were in good company. So was the Office for Budget Responsibility. I mean, everyone thought it was.
But nobody expected the furlough scheme to go on for 18 months.
Right.
If I'd known it was going to go on for 18 months, I probably would have been a bit more optimistic in my prediction there. But also there seems to be, there is a real, there's a lot of job vacancies going around because I wouldn't put it down all to Brexit, but there's a lack of people coming into the country. I think primarily because of the, amber list, red list, all that kind of stuff, rather than Brexit, but Brexit probably hasn't helped. So there are some serious labor shortages, which should definitely kind of ameliorate the impact of unemployment. So I'm not too worried about that now.
Well, this is another important point, but it also feeds into average earnings. And a few weeks ago, the Spectator interviewed Andy Haldane, the outgoing chief economist at the Bank of England, and he was very forthright about the combination of Brexit and COVID means that there are now a lot of opportunities in the labor market, actually, and a lot of job vacancies because we don't know how many migrants have left the country, but it's estimated it could be up to 1 million people. And employers aren't able to get people through the door at the wages they were offering before. So they're having to hike their wages. So there are a lot of factors here as to why unemployment is, not unemployment. There are a lot of reasons as to why average wages are increasing. And he was suggesting that the furlough scheme perhaps has gone on a bit too long because you have people on furlough who aren't filling these job vacancies. So I think there are reasons to be optimistic. Average wages going up in and of itself is no bad thing for the people who are benefiting from that. But this all adds to inflationary pressure. When you have something like the triple lock, it means that there's going to have to be a lot more taxpayer money that goes to boosting state pensions. So there are unintended consequences of what in theory could be quite a good thing.
Yeah, and that brings me on to inflation, which is the other thing I wanted to ask you about. Because there are still a lot of people who are quite chilled out about inflation, mainly the people who are employed to be experts about it. I tend to strongly disagree with them for three reasons, really. Firstly, it's all right printing a bit of money when GDP is going up because that's what the economy needs, but GDP has gone down enormously. Secondly, unlike in 2008, the money is actually going into real people's pockets, which is great in a sense, but it's going to be spent. Whereas when it was, in 2008, it was going to banks' balance sheets and couldn't really cause inflation as such. And thirdly, there are a lot of shortages because of COVID, largely. And I looked at the commodity prices this morning, and it's amazing. So this is the increase in price in commodities in the last year. Copper's gone up 50%, iron ore's gone up 100%, platinum's gone up 25%, corn has gone up 99%, sugar's gone up 53%, coffee's gone up 35%, pigs have gone up 109%, gas has gone up 115%, oil has gone up 82%, lumber has gone up 44%. I know personally it's very hard to get lumber. I'm trying to get some railway sleepers at the moment. You cannot get them for love or money. There's a worldwide shortage
building a log cabin
of wood and timber. And with the exception of oil, which dropped a lot during the pandemic, most of these things didn't go down that much to start with. It's not like they're coming back to their original prices. They are way above where they were in March 2020. I mean, this is inflation. I mean, but how can this not be felt in people's pockets in a fairly short space of time, especially once everything's kind of relaxed again and people are spending the enormous amounts of money they've now got saved up. We've got personal savings at records high. I mean, this is surely, in addition, obviously, to the incredible amount of money printing in the UK, America, EU, everywhere, this has to be a recipe, not for hyperinflation necessarily, but for pretty high inflation.
Well, the problem is that we don't need hyperinflation for things to go badly wrong. I mean, we are so used to rock bottom figures here that an increase of 2 or 3% is going to be acutely felt, but that's still low for normal times. And the tools that you would usually use to curb inflation, hiking interest rates, are not affordable in the UK right now because we need to be able to borrow money really, really cheaply because we just can't pay all of our bills. And the chancellor had all this in mind when he did his budget in March. The tax hikes and the rest of it, which didn't seem particularly conservative, or at least not free market conservative, weren't about trying to balance the books. Nobody thinks that's realistic in the next few years anyway. They were about making sure that if interest rates and inflation all went up by about 1%, he'd have the money just to service the debt. And I just don't think this is, look, my generation's never experienced scary inflation. Young people now just don't understand
what high interest rates.
Or high interest. We don't understand what that means. We don't understand how badly that can be felt and how quickly it can happen. So I'm not trying to speak from some place of authority. I've been writing about it quite a lot because I've been interested in the fact that there's few people in government who are actually concerned about this now, and a growing number of economists, I think even on the left, are admitting that they didn't expect to see inflation go up so quickly. In the UK, it's still manageable. It's about 2.1% last time the figures came in. That's manageable, just above the bank's target, not by much, but that was much higher than the economic consensus. And I think that's what's worrying to me, is that everybody's just been assuming that, the economic principles that go back to the dawn of time have somehow changed. And everything's going to be fine, if I'm to quote Chris Snowdon, not on inflation, but on life in general. And the problem with inflation, as we know, is that it can run away from you really quickly. So I'm nervous about it because you also have Joe Biden over in the States, who is committed to spending trillions and trillions more dollars. The U.S. economy is running hot and they might be able to handle it, but that's going to be felt all over the world as well if it goes wrong.
Yeah, and it's 5%, I think, in USA at the moment, inflation.
Yeah, and they're convinced it's temporary. They're saying it's transitory. Maybe it is. What if it's not? And a lot of people said after the financial crash, we're going to have this, huge inflation spike, and it didn't happen, at least not in the traditional way. Asset prices certainly went up, and
house prices too.
Yeah, you don't want to fearmonger about it. But I just, people that I think are just so well respected in the field, people like Andy Haldane, who's leaving the Bank of England and is now becoming very vocal about the threat of inflation. If they're worried about it, we should probably take it somewhat seriously.
Yeah, he seems to be one of the few people who is, though. I've noticed in the pages of The Economist over the last 6 months, the kind of a growing sense of dread from a few months ago saying, this is something that's we should be aware of, but it basically is going to be okay. To kind of a couple of weeks later, it's like inflation may be a really big problem, and it's just getting more and more, getting more and more on board. From 6 months ago, it was pretty much just me and you and Liam Halligan who were concerned about this. Finally, just let's finish US politics. Now, I, as you know, Kate, I'm not American, and therefore, because I'm not American and I'm not a nerd, so I don't really follow US politics. I did when Trump was in charge because Trump was very funny, but now that Sleepy Joe's in charge, I've kind of switched off again. So apart from printing like $5 trillion, what's he been up to? How's it going?
He's mostly just trying to spend more money. He wants an infrastructure bill, which is going to be trillions of dollars. He wants an American Families Bill, which is going to be trillions of dollars.
What's that?
Maybe 1 trillion. Support for childcare, and education and the rest of it. Basically, everything needs a rescue plan now, and under the guise of a rescue plan, we're going to be spending a lot of money. Now, let's not forget that under Donald Trump, the Republicans really moved away from, I think, being called a party of fiscally responsible elected representatives. And actually, the Republicans are on board with some of the spending, but they're in a real debate right now, really rubbing up against each other about the extent to which they're going to spend more money. Look, a lot of America needs to be updated. Like, our infrastructure is appalling compared to European counterparts. I think there's a healthy and sensible amount of investment that could be taking place in America right now. But the amount of money they're talking about spending is just unreal. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. I suppose Joe Biden's probably preparing already for the 2022 midterm election, in which there's a very real chance that the Republicans will take back the Senate, because they need one seat to do so, and even potentially take the House. They made a lot of gains there. And at that point, he won't be able to do anything. Our system, which is designed to make it really hard to pass legislation and get things through, is playing out rapidly right now, because he thinks this is his opportunity, possibly in the next 2 to 6 years, to actually get stuff done.
Do you think he's literally an advocate of modern monetary policy, or modern monetary theory, I should say? I mean, the amount at which he's producing so much money and spending, it's way beyond Keynesianism, isn't it? I mean, this is just thinking that you can print money without any consequences.
He didn't always used to be so nonchalant towards spending. I mean, you can find speeches of Senator Joe Biden talking about fiscal responsibility. I mean, when Barack Obama ran in 2008, he talked about the U.S. debt as unpatriotic towards young people. They're all aware of this, but we've just moved. So the pandemic in particular has just given Western countries, I think, the sense that they really can spend without consequence. It's already catching up with them. I think it was somewhat short-lived. I'm not sure Biden thinks he can do it forever. I mean, the far left of his party is trying to push him to do so. I'm not convinced he believes that, but he's listening to the Fed, which are telling him that, small bump in inflation right now is temporary, and that they're confident that he can keep going. And so he's listening to the experts, which is not surprising. I mean, he's in many ways the antithesis to Donald Trump, who did not want to listen to the experts. Sometimes the experts get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. That's the gamble. No, I don't. I mean, I think Joe is probably one of the more fiscally responsible people in his party. I suppose that shows just how far left the Democrats have gone, but yeah.
Blimey. Well, I mean, this is one thing I would love to be wrong about, because if we can just keep printing trillions of dollars with no consequences,
Nice.
we have solved the ultimate problem of economics, which is scarcity of resources. So let's hope we're both wrong about this, and because we can get rid of taxes then, right? If we can print money, we don't need to tax people.
We can live in some kind of communist utopia, unlimited wealth. Yeah, I mean, it sounds delightful, Chris. But
I look forward to it.
Yeah,
if the Fed says it's okay, they know what they're talking about. We don't know anything, do it.
As your colleague Christian Niemitz points out, it's worked so well in the other countries that have gone for socialism.
Yeah, I can't think of any examples.
I can't think of any examples where it's gone badly wrong. So I think it's going to be great. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. Exactly. A fine note to end on. Kate, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you at home for watching. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. If you like our digital content, why not give us some money on our Patreon? Like Eric Keane, Richard Leader, Mark Edwards, Timothy Worrell, and James Burnswald. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for that. I shall see you anon. It's coming home. Goodbye.